Hello, everybody. It is that time of the year again, the time that Spotify shows us our listening habits and makes fun of us for the amount of music we listen to. Anyways, I know that they give us a top 5 albums of the year, but that doesn't necessarily mean those were our favorite albums. That was just the ones we listened to the most, right? So today I decided to make my own list of my top 50 favorite albums of this year. Before I get on with this video, I just wanted to let everybody know that this is my first video on this channel, and if you like this type of content, please maybe give it a like. Alright, starting off here, this is in no particular order by the way, I have Shed by Title Fight. This has been one of my favorite albums for a good half of this year. I've had this on loop. It's just one of my favorite things to ever be released right now. My favorite song on this album right now is called 27. The lyrics just hit different, if you know what I mean. This album was released in 2011. This next album is called Evil Stoners Incorporated. It's by Worm Alert. I'm pretty sure this band formed just this year. My favorite song on here is Freak Mode, and it came out in 2024. The next album on my list is called The Agony in Memory. It is by Garden of Mary. My favorite song off of this album was Sleepless Nights. This album was released in 2017. My next selection was a fairly popular grindcore band called Capitalist Casualties and their album Disassembly Line. This album was released in 1992, and I'd have to say my favorite song off of here is called Violence Junkie. My next pick was Milo Goes to College by The Descendants. My favorite song off of here is definitely I'm Not a Punk, which is also one of my favorite Descendants songs of all time. This album was released in 2022. The next pick on my list is called B-Sides and Rarities. It's by Adam B. My favorite song off of this album was called Lead Me On. This album was actually released just a few days ago, so obviously to 2024. Diving back into the hardcore genre, we have Demonstration by Tsunami. This is one of my favorite albums of all time right now. My favorite song off of this album is called Tsunami Style, and this album was released in 2019. My next pick is another old one, 39 Smoothed Out Slappy Hours by Green Day. This album was released back in 1991, and my favorite song is called 16. I am so huge on Green Day. It is one of my all-time favorite bands, and even though this is their oldest released work, I still think it's absolutely amazing. My next album that I picked is more in the realm of screamo, or like Midwest emo. This album is called Taptium Lucidium. It's by a band called Sylvanor Nene. My favorite song off this album would be Bitch I Love Drugs, Fuck Ronald Reagan, and this album was released in 2023. To be honest, I have no fucking clue what genre this is, but this is Versus Self's album, Everything Seems Better Now. My favorite song off of here is Mourn, and it was released in 2020. If you know what genre this is, please let me know. This next pick is in the realm of scrams. It is called Six Panels by Six Panels. It's their self-titled. My favorite song off of here is called I'm Wrong, and this album was also released in 2023. Another album I've been extremely into this year is Jaws of Life by Pierce the Veil. My favorite song on here, and probably my favorite Pierce the Veil song, would be Emergency Contact. This album was released in 2023. My next pick is Wildlife by La Dispute. My favorite song is King Park, and this album was released in 2011. There's just something so gut-wrenching about the song King Park. If you really look into the lyrics, you'll see what I mean. Next up, I got Homesick by A Day to Remember, with my favorite song being Have Faith in Me. This album is actually on the older side, with it being released in 2009. I recently really got into A Day to Remember, and they have come to be one of my favorite easycore bands. My next pick is called Dubra. It's by this band called Sigs. They're a smaller band out of Arizona. My favorite song off of this album is definitely Scum, and this album was released in 2021, and I would definitely recommend checking it out. And now for some power violence. This next pick is called Cleveland Power Violence by Apartment 213. I hope that's how you say that. My favorite song off of here is After School 38 Special, and this album was released in 2017. My next pick is Loveless by My Bloody Valentine, and my favorite song off of here is When You Sleep. My Bloody Valentine has been one of my favorite shoegaze artists for as long as I can remember, like as long as I've discovered the genre. This album was released in 1991, but I just recently got into this album heavily this year. My next pick is by Speck. This album is called 038. My favorite song on here is You're a Fool, and it was released in 2023. This is some fantastic hardcore, I tell ya. You gotta go listen to this right now. This next album is called Amends by Grey Days, which, in case you didn't know, Chester Bennington from Linkin Park actually sings in this band, or he did. And my favorite song off of this album is called Sometimes. I would definitely recommend this if you have not checked it out yet. The release date is 2020. Speaking of Chester Bennington and Linkin Park, next on my list is Hybrid Theory. This has been one of my favorite albums since I was a little kid. My favorite song has always been A Place for My Head. This album was released in 2000. My next pick is Nevermind by Nirvana. I know it's a basic pick, but you can't really go wrong with Nirvana. My favorite song off of here, and maybe favorite Nirvana song of all time, would be Lithium. This album was released in 1991. My next pick is a beautiful one-song release by Bell Witch called Mirror Reaper. This song is an hour and a half long. It is some of the best funeral doom metal I have ever heard. I could sit and listen to this for hours just on repeat. If you've yet to check this out, I would highly recommend checking it out when you're doing homework or if you're trying to go to sleep, because this is some of the most relaxing funeral doom I have ever heard. Also, look at the cover art. That's absolutely amazing. This album was released in 2017. Another album on my end of the year list is Glow On by Turnstile. My favorite song on here was called Holiday, and this album was released in 2021. I honestly don't really know what genre to call this. All I know is it sounds good. My next pick is an Ariana Grande album, actually, called Eternal Sunshine. My favorite song was Yes and this album actually just came out this year, in case you did not know. My next pick is called Neverland by A Better Tomorrow. My favorite song on here is called Concrete Waves, and this was released in 2023. I'm pretty sure this is also a smaller artist because I had never heard of this until like this year. My next pick is Jankum's self-titled album, with my favorite song being Earwig. This was released in 2023, and if you're interested in power violence, definitely give it a listen. Next on my list is Saviors by Green Day. This album just came out at the beginning of this year, 2024. My favorite song on here is one of the slower ones, actually, called Susie Chapstick. If you haven't listened to this album, you have to listen to it. My next pick is Trick by Alex G. This album was released in 2012. My favorite song off of this album is Mary. My next choice is Monarchy of Mold by a band called Maul. They are death metal, so if you're into death metal, definitely check them out. My favorite song off of here is called Infatuation, and this was released in 2020. Another album that made my list this year is Warning by Green Day. This was released in 2000, with my favorite song being Macy's Day Parade. I feel like a lot of 2000 music, or just like music that was released in the year 2000, is just really good. Another album that I listened to a lot this year is Explosions by 3 Days of Grace. This album was released in 2022. My favorite song off of this album, and maybe just by 3 Days of Grace as a band, is called Lifetime. It's just a very nice, slow song that you can really feel pain in. I really enjoyed this album. Back in the realm of hardcore, I picked the album Apology by Weekend Nachos. My favorite song off of this album is called Fake Political Song, just because the title is like hilarious. This album was released in 2016. My next pick for this year is Public Void by Penelope Scott. My favorite song by her just in general is Feel Better. This album was released in 2020. Back to the year 2000, I picked out the Marshall Mathers LP by Eminem, obviously. My favorite song on here is Stan. And I think this album as a whole just might be my favorite Eminem album. The oldest album on my list for this year is Juju by Susie and the Banshees. It's amazing post-punk, in case you haven't heard it. My favorite song by them as a band in general is Spellbound, and this album was released in 1981. Taking us to 1994, we have Dookie by Green Day. This is the album that really broke Green Day into mainstream, and it's not my favorite Green Day album, but is definitely up there in my top 5. My favorite song off of this album is Coming Clean. The next album on my list is called Follow the Leader by Korn. My favorite song on this album is called Pretty, and this album was released in 1998. This next album is basically my middle school anthem. It's called Make Room by Destroy Boys. I was absolutely obsessed with this band in 7th and 8th grade. This band was just basically my whole entire middle school life. My favorite song off of this album is called Vixen, and it was released in 2018. And bringing us back to the 90s, we have Radiohead's OK Computer. My favorite song off of this album is Karma Police, and this album was released in 1997. 4 years before OK Computer came out, we got Siamese Dream by the Smashing Pumpkins in 1993. My favorite song off of this album is called Today, which is probably one of their most popular songs, and for a very good reason. Next, I bring you Dirt by Alice in Chains, which still remains in the 90s. My favorite song on this album is Rain When I Die. This album came out in 1992. A little bit of a genre switch for you, I got some country, Traveler by Chris Stapleton. This is one of my favorite country albums of all time. My favorite song on this album is called Whiskey and You, and this album was released in 2015. Next up on my list, I have She Wants Revenge self-titled. My favorite song off of this album is called Sister. This album was released in 2005. Once again, another hardcore album appears, Snuffed on Sight self-titled, with my favorite song being Blunt Cough. This album came out in 2021 and is one of my favorite hardcore albums to date. And Weekend Nachos appears for a second time on this year's list with their album Punish and Destroy. My favorite song on this album is Nothing's Changed. This album was released in 2007. Continuing in the 2000s, in 2002, Avril Lavigne's album Let Go was released. My favorite song on here is Complicated, which I know is one of her most popular songs, but honestly, it's just my favorite. Like, I don't care what's popular and what's unpopular, you can like whatever you want. 1 year later came the release of Linkin Park's Meteora. This was in 2003. My favorite song off of this album is called Fate. Another easycore album that I really like is The Story So Far's Under Soil and Dirt. I recently really got into The Story So Far this year, and I think my favorite song on this album, and just in general by this band, is called Quicksand. This album was released in 2011. Next, I bring you Meet Me at the Altar's Past, Present, and Future. My favorite song on this album is Say It, and this album was released in 2023. And last but certainly not least, I have Pale Swordsman by Kek Durak. My favorite song on this album is called Amor. This album came out in 2021 and is one of my favorite black metal albums to date. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and maybe subscribe to the channel. Like I said, this is my first video on this channel, and if you want to see more music related content in the future, please let me know.